Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for half of October, half of November. That's how I'm doing them now, spanning 2 months, sort of half of each. And I'm going to dive right in because I have a ton of stories, as usual. Though it seems particularly like a lot this month. I don't know. Anyway, here we go. My first story pick for this roundup is Though the Heavens Fell by Louis Evans in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. This is a spaceship opera of sorts where the main characters are three massive spaceships: Sunspire, Happy Hippo, and the very ancient Carmine. What we follow in the story is a ritual and a judgment, an ancient ritual, and a rather new judgment. Because a crime has been committed, maybe, and now the ancient Carmine will render its judgment on the other ships, and on one escaped cyborg. Evans's prose is so rich and so ornate, and just so resonant with emotional power as we come to know the ships, especially Carmine and the universe they inhabit. Having the story told like this through the ships gives the whole story a point of view and a voice that is really uniquely imagined. I love the reveal of Carmine's past and Carmine's new purpose. I also loved getting to know the cyborg at the heart of the judgment. And I loved the majestic feel of the story. As it says in the story's intro, how can we lonely aliens trust each other? How can we tear down a civilization of exploitation and replace it with one of care? It's a terrific story. My next story pick is In the Smile Place by Toby Ogundiran in Faya number 24. Now, if you love found footage horror, I do. If you love the kind of weird and dark and creepy stories that reach back into childhood and kind of turn you inside out as you read them, then this horror story is absolutely for you. An older brother has gone back home after years away because his younger brother has gone missing. And hidden in the past of these brothers is an incident that might explain what is happening now. And there's also a stash of old VHS tapes and a very creepy mall. I love everything about this story. I love the way it cracks open the relationship between the two siblings, and I love the way it burrows into the deepest, darkest places. My next story pick is The Eighth Cigarette by Lisa Kai in The Dark. I adore every twist and turn of this story as we follow a woman being reborn, reincarnated again and again into what almost seems like a story, or stories maybe, written by someone else. It's the story of Madame Butterfly and of Madame Chrysanthème, stories written by authors or an author who somehow know intimate details of the narrator's past lives. And we follow this narrator through lives and deaths, war and loss, horrors and glimpses of peace, and also glimpses of a sister who is lost again and again. Finally, we follow her into a life where she tries to put an end to the power of the author who keeps reducing her to a victim and a thoughtless, childlike bystander in her own story. And there's just such a gloriously shifting, dreamlike, almost hallucinogenic quality to the story. And I love how the narrator refuses to be what the fiction wants her to be and fiercely keeps fighting against the stories told about her in order to live her own life and tell her own story. My next story pick is actually not a story. It's a nonfiction piece. It's Burning Sassafras by Cassie E. Brown in the Deadlands. I mostly recommend fiction here, But this piece is so exquisite as it delves into death and belief, magic, and the deep roots of the past in the Ozarks. Um, the ways in which people deal with death, how they try to ward it off, how they try to understand it and get a grip on it, the way death used to be so close in everyday life. All of it is captured beautifully here. I love stories and essays that have a strong sense of place and that tell you something about a particular corner of the world while also telling you something about what it means to live in this world in general. And this piece does all those things. My next story pick is Rain in the Potholes by Mariam Asif in Tasavvur. This story is sort of a dystopia. It's a dystopia for sure. It's set in a world riven by a terrible, destructive war that is poisoning the world and everyone in it. Asif's story follows two people in this world, Nina and Kaz, who are living in hiding from the horrors of the surface world. So they live below a town called Jairaz. And they keep away from others and away from the world, navigating through the pipes that connect them to the town, avoiding the potholes that might claim their lives if they were to stumble into them. And the story really plays out like this really tense psychological mystery/drama as Kaz and Nina bring children and dogs to alleviate their loneliness. But everyone that's brought into their hiding place eventually disappears without a trace. And there's just so much tension in this piece, so much dread, so much love, but Asif really captures the claustrophobia and inertia of their survival beautifully. And it is a gripping read. My next story pick is Sister Silky, Siren, Shark by M.A. Blanchard in Strange Horizon. This is a fiercely powerful story that cuts right to the bone. Blanchard weaves together myth and folklore into a new tapestry where a community of women and their shape-shifting daughters live out their lives on an island, trading, and where the women, the moms, trade some of their daughters to the sailors who visit, trading them to buy safety for the community, giving up their own children, knowing they won't come back. And from this bleak setting, Blanchard tells us a rather epic tale about coming of age, of coming together, of resistance and survival. And there's a lot of pain and grief, but also glimmers of new hope. I love how the characters in the story come full circle at the end in the understanding of their past and how they decide to find a different future than they thought possible. My next story pick is Anu and the Vetala by Srikripa Krishna Prasad at Podcastle, and it's narrated by S.B. Divya. This story is one of several stories in Podcastle's Indigenous Magic special, and it is a fabulous, fabulous story. Anu is on a quest to find a way to live, to defeat the disease that will claim her life. What she needs is the magic of a Vetala, but they are not easy to capture and not easy to control or bend to your will. And the specific one that she goes after turns out to be every bit as strong and unrelenting as Anu had feared and expected. But when Anu meets the Vetala, something unexpected occurs. And this story weaves together folklore and horror, fantasy and fairy tale, and I love how the tropes and themes are splintered and reshaped here. My next story pick is Warm Beds, Camas Calientes in Spanish, by Monica Bustos and Samovar, and it's translated by Analia Villagra. A surreal, absolutely gorgeous story about three people sharing a room and a bed, but who never see each other. All they see are the traces the others leave behind, like the indentation and warmth of a body in the bed. And to me, this is a story about human nature, about loneliness and companionship, and how difficult it is to connect with others or truly understand the people we long to be with. My next story pick is The Princess N.P. by Brian Hugenbrook at Escape Pod and is narrated by Lee Wallace. This is a thought-provoking and fascinating science fiction story about data princesses, indentured thinkers in essence, who are used by a ruler known as the Queen. The princesses are conditioned, which means that their fundamental brain processes are altered to accrue and analyze massive amounts of information. Emotions and opinions are not required and actively suppressed. And one of these princesses has been assigned to Hexa Station, where she suddenly finds herself faced with a situation that will put her on a collision course with the Queen, who has ruled her entire life. I love the world this story is set in, and I love the characters and the way the writer blends fantasy elements, like queens and princesses, into the science fiction tale. My next story pick is Of All the New Yorks in All the Worlds by Indra Das at Tor.com. And I'll quote the story description at Tor. A student of multiversal time travel slips from one version of New York to another, discovering that love may transcend timelines, but so too can heartbreak. So this story is about a multiverse and about a man traveling through the multiverse. But it's also a story of how he lost the woman he loved because she turned him away, and how he holds on to that relationship by visiting an alternate version of his ex. Officially, he goes to see the alt girlfriend to deliver a letter from the other version of her to her alt world self, but he's also hanging on to something that he lost. And there's this quiet sense of sadness and loss in the story, and an acute awareness of all the immense possibilities of pain and love that are present in a universe and in a life. There are so many secrets kept and so many stories told and untold. My next story pick is Tithe the Bones, Sell the Blood by Austin Habershaw in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. So this is set in a city that's ruled by the bloodless dead. And here, Cedric is playing cards with 3 ghosts and a wight. He's trying to win a stolen soul back from them, and he's betting using his own blood. Habershaw's world in this story is a desperate place, and I love the detail and texture of it and the way the terrible powers at play are laid bare in a game of cards. Cedric does have a plan, but in this card game, things don't always go to plan. My next story pick is The Carretella by Io Carpiso in Anathema. I'm late reading and reviewing this wonderful issue of Anathema, but it is full of great stories, and this one is one of my favorites. Its story has an evocative fairy tale vibe, though it's a fairy tale anchored and shaped by the real world. Miguel gets a ride on the strange Carabao and gets to see some magic up close. There's darkness and menace here, much of it lurking beneath the surface, and I loved the resolution. My next story pick is also from Anathema, and it's His Soul's Keeper by Koso Agbuonike. This is a wickedly tied knot of a story where a child tries to survive in a new place after her village has been destroyed and she has been abducted. She finds a friend, sort of, in a new boy there, and even tries to help him by using some of the magic she was taught as a child. This is a sharp and jagged story where the repercussions of cruelty are laid bare again and again. I love the voice of the story and the way it weaves together fantasy, magic, and horror with some real-world evils. My next story pick is The Ghost Eaters by Spencer Ellsworth in Nightmare. The man had come and gone, this story begins. Other someones too, and all the lessers, but Barley still guarded the house. So this is a ghost story about a dog. And yes, it made me cry. Our old dog passed away recently, and I should have known that this story would break my heart, and it did. It's an exquisite dog ghost story about a very good dog who has been guarding his house for much too long. And now he's in danger from a new pack of foes. Luckily for the dog, there is someone who wants to help him, though it isn't easy to gain the trust of an old, lonely guard dog. I was sobbing at the end of the story, and I love it so much with every fiber of my being. My next story pick is Sharp Things, Killing Things by A.C. Weiss in Nightmare. This is a profoundly unsettling, deeply disturbing horror story about a place, about a town, about people who are slowly immersed into darkness, and where that darkness seems to enter them, creeping under their skin and into their souls. Strange images and messages on billboards, a strange person appearing in their midst, or was he there all along? A ruined building, sharp things in the rubble, and so many deaths. This is horror that doesn't flinch from self-harm and suicide, so be warned that it is strong stuff. It's also brilliant. My next story pick is This Excessive Use of Pickled Foods by Leora Spitzer in Choreo magazine. I've been reading my way through the latest issue of Choreo, and it's full of fantastic stories. This is a quiet, lovely, beautifully written slice of life sci-fi story that really hit home for me. It's about identity and memory, it's about food and community, it's about communication and loneliness, about friendship and so much more. And it's also about pickles. When Bex arrives at Concarcan Station, she finds a shop that sells pickles. And when she tries the pickles, strange things happen. Bex also meets an alien, and as it turns out, food and friendship might go hand in hand. My next story pick is All Good Children Come Out to Play. And it's by Carlo Jaeger Rodriguez, and it's also in Choreo magazine. You might already know, if you listen to these roundups, that I love stories about siblings. And this is a great story about a complicated and complex sibling relationships that goes on after one of the siblings dies. The horror simmers just below the surface of the story, and we know right from the get-go that Marta, the sister, feels a lot of guilt about the death of her brother Lazaro. And when there's an annual festival for the dead, things happen and things change. This is a dark and sharp story that cut me to the quick. My next story pick is Skin by Isha Karki, also in Choreo magazine. This is a surreal, yet very real story about the different faces we wear for different people and what we lose and gain as we change ourselves to fit what others think we ought to be. Here, those faces are tangible and real, items to slip off and on, and when they are lost, things do not go well. There's a lot of pain and sadness in the story, and there's so much here that feels unsettlingly familiar. My next story is Rabbit Test by Samantha Mills in Uncanny Magazine. This is powerful, incisive, and packed with a bright, blazing, ferocious anger at those who want to control and limit people's power to choose what to do with their bodies. Yes, it's about abortion, it's about contraception, and Mill's story just, it hits hard and it hits true. We follow Grace and what happens to her in 2091, near future sci-fi, when she gets pregnant in a country, the United States, that is controlling and supervising every facet of her body and denying her the right to make her own choices. Woven into this story is the history of abortion and contraception and the oppression that has also come with that. This is about choices and choices denied and choices made illegal. It's near future sci-fi that is also a history lesson, and it is so finely written and illuminated from within by both anger, hope, and incandescent resistance. Now, next up is a whole swath of stories from Apex Magazine, issue 133. I loved this issue, and I think I picked all the original fiction from this issue for this roundup. So let's get started. So my story picks from Apex 133 is The Skinless Man Counts to Five by Paul Jessup. Now, Jessup's story is set on a generation spaceship, but this is science fiction that bleeds very much into horror of the strange, surreal, and literally cosmic variety. I love the enigmatic yet foreboding sense of doom that infuses the entire story from start to finish, and I adore Jessup's darkly luminous, haunting prose that pulls you in and twists the perspective of everything around you. Next up is Kings and Popes and Saints by John Hanson, also Apex Magazine. Delusions or visions feature heavily in this story because Patricia sees the world in a different way than others see it, at least most of the time. There are indeed kings and popes and saints all around her in her yard, and there are also the strange weed things in the yard that trouble her, even though she's got tinfoil to protect her brain. And then Justin comes along trying to sell her magazine subscriptions. That's all I'm going to say. This story has a dark sense of humor, and I loved how it takes you into the surreal mind of Patricia. And I love how you're not quite sure until the very end of what is real and what is not. Next story pick is 10 Steps for Effective Mold Removal by Derek Bowden in Apex. Now, the mold apocalypse / pandemic as told in a series of product reviews by Hitomi A. That's what this story is. And I just cannot do the story justice in a short recap and review. All I can do is tell you to read it. It's heartbreaking, it's hilarious, and spine-tingling horror all at once. The mold is everywhere, but surely there must be some products out there that can help get rid of it or protect you, right? Bowden captures Hitomi A's voice so perfectly in the story and manages to tell a story and let us see the characters so vividly through the product reviews. And at the end, when the twist of the knife comes, it gave me chills. Next up is Nothing That Bleeds by Leah Ning, also in Apex Magazine. This is a devastating, powerful, gorgeously told story about violence and love and a relationship that shatters the lives of those in that relationship. Again and again, the same relationship plays out in different iterations with the same darkness and the same secrets and the same pain and love. And yet things change and things pass. Masterfully told and sharp as a knife's edge. Next up, also from Apex, is On the Sunlit Side of Venus by Benjamin Parzibok. In this science fiction story, a woman finds herself alone on a research station on Venus. Earth has gone silent. She doesn't know what happened. Her husband is gone. Her only company is the station's artificial intelligence. For all she knows, she's the last human being left alive until a message comes in. There's so much going on beneath the surface of the story, love and grief, hope and despair, and I love that Parzibok allows the quiet moments to unfold quietly. My next story pick from Apex is The Day When the Last War is Over by Sergei Gerasimov. Now, Gerasimov is from Ukraine, and reading the story about the remnants of humanity returning and fading away, dissolving, absolutely gutted me. There's a sense of exhaustion, of hollow hopes, of a yearning for something that cannot be in the story that makes it cut deep and linger. My final story pick for this rather long roundup is Sweet Baby by Thomas Ha in Clark's World. This is a truly unsettling, profoundly disturbing story about a family that is so dysfunctional as to descend into utter horror. The relationship dynamics at play between the children, between the parents, and between parents and children in the story are both painfully incisive and devastating. This was a hard read for me, but Ha brings some grace and salvation at the end that I wasn't expecting, and that elevated the story even more for me. It's brilliant. And that's all I had for this month's Roundup. Thank you so much for listening, and maybe you'll listen next month. See you then.